The front door to David's apartment didn't just creak, it groaned, a sound that usually signaled the end of another crushing 14-hour shift. But tonight, the air inside wasn't stale. It smelled of lemon polish and slow-cooked beef. David froze. His first thought was that he'd walked into the wrong house. His second was that someone had broken in. But when he crept into the living room, gripping his umbrella like a bat, he dropped it. There, on her hands and knees, scrubbing a grape juice stain out of his tattered rug, was Victoria Sterling, the billionaire CEO of the company he worked for. She was wearing rubber gloves and weeping. What she said next didn't just explain why she was there. It shattered his entire world. David Bennett checked his watch 3 times before the elevator even reached the lobby. 7:58 a.m. If he sprinted, he could punch in before the dreaded red ink marked him late. Again. He adjusted the collar of his shirt. It was frayed at the edges, a subtle sign of the slow, grinding poverty that had consumed his life since Emily died 2 years ago. At 32, David wasn't supposed to be a junior archivist at a massive conglomerate like Sterling Global. He was supposed to be building houses. He was a licensed architect. But when Emily got sick, the medical bills ate the savings, then the car, and finally, his career. He needed stable insurance, not the freelance hustle. So he took the job in the basement of Sterling Global, filing papers for people who made more in a month than he did in a year. "Hold the door." David instinctively jammed his hand between the closing steel doors. They bounced back. A man in a bespoke navy suit stepped in, not even glancing at David. It was Derek Halloway, the VP of Operations, a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes. "Thanks," Derek muttered, scrolling through his phone. David nodded, pressing himself into the corner. He was invisible here, a ghost in the machine. The elevator stopped at the penthouse floor, the executive suite. The doors slid open, revealing a world of glass, chrome, and terrifying silence. And there she was, Victoria Sterling. She was standing by the reception desk, reviewing a stack of documents. At 34, Victoria was a legend in the city. She had taken over her father's empire 5 years ago and doubled its value. They called her the Sterling Silver Ice Pick. She was sharp, cold, and reportedly had a heart made of titanium. She wore a charcoal power suit that probably cost more than David's rent for the next decade. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, flawless bun. As Derek stepped out, flashing a charming grin, Victoria didn't smile back. She just handed him a file. "You're late, Derek. The Tokyo merger files are incomplete. Fix it." Her voice was low, smooth, and terrifying. "Traffic was a nightmare, Victoria. I don't pay you for excuses. I pay you for results." She turned, her icy blue eyes sweeping across the elevator. For a split second, her gaze locked onto David. David stopped breathing. He felt like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. He expected her to sneer, or perhaps ask security why a basement dweller was breathing her air. But she didn't scowl. She paused. Her eyes widened, just a fraction. It was a look of recognition? No, that was impossible. He was nobody. The elevator doors closed, severing the connection. David let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. His heart was hammering against his ribs. "Get it together, Bennett," he whispered to himself. The rest of the day was a blur of paper cuts and dust. The archives were located in Sub-Level B, a windowless dungeon of metal cabinets. David spent 8 hours digitizing records from the 1990s. Every hour, he checked his phone to make sure the school hadn't called. His daughter, Chloe, was 6. She was the light of his life, possessing her mother's wild, curly hair and David's stubborn chin. But lately, she had been quiet, withdrawn. The apartment was small, damp, and lonely. David tried to be both Mum and Dad, but he knew he was failing. He was too tired to play pretend, too broke to buy the toys she wanted, and too sad to hide his own grief. At 5:00 p.m., his supervisor, a man named Gary who smelled permanently of tuna sandwiches, dumped a new stack of files on David's desk. "Need these sorted by date before you leave, Bennett." "Gary, I have to pick up my daughter. The after-school program charges $1 for every minute I'm late." Gary shrugged. "And Sterling Global pays you minimum wage to do a job. Do it, or I find someone who will." David clenched his jaw. He sat back down. It was 6:45 p.m. when he finally ran out of the building into the pouring rain. He had missed the bus. He had to run 6 blocks to the subway. By the time he reached the community center, he was soaked to the bone, his cheap shoes squelching with every step. Mrs. Higgins, the program director, was waiting at the door with Chloe. Chloe looked tiny in her oversized yellow raincoat, clutching a drawing she'd made. "Mr. Bennett," Mrs. Higgins sighed. "That's $45 in late fees." I can pay you on Friday," David pleaded, wiping rainwater from his eyes. "Please, Mrs. Higgins, I'm good for it." "Friday," she said sternly. "Or she can't come back Monday." David grabbed Chloe's hand, forcing a smile he didn't feel. "Hey, Bug, ready for spaghetti tacos tonight?" Chloe looked up, her eyes solemn. "Daddy, you're wet." "Just a little shower, sweetie. Let's go home." Home. A 600-square-foot apartment in the crumbling Garden View complex, which had no garden and a view of a brick wall. The elevator in the building had been broken for weeks, so David carried Chloe up 4 flights of stairs, his back screaming in protest. He unlocked the door, bracing himself for the usual routine: kick aside the pile of laundry, ignore the peeling paint, and try to make the cold space feel warm. But as he turned the key, he realized something. The door was already unlocked. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in David's chest. He pushed Chloe behind him instantly. "Stay here, Chloe. Don't move," he whispered. "Daddy?" "Shh." He pushed the door open slowly. He expected to see a burglar ransacking their meager possessions. He grabbed the wet umbrella tight, ready to swing. He stepped into the small hallway. The first thing that hit him was the smell. It wasn't the usual scent of damp drywall and old cooking oil. It was lavender, and something rich like rosemary and roasting meat. The lights were on. All of them. Even the lamp with the broken switch. David crept around the corner into the living room, and his brain simply refused to process what he was seeing. The room was immaculate. The mountain of laundry that had been on the sofa? Gone. Folded in neat stacks. The toy bin that had exploded all over the floor. Organized by size. The windows were sparkling. And in the center of the room, on her hands and knees, was a woman. She was wearing a silk blouse with the sleeves rolled up and a pair of yellow rubber cleaning gloves that looked comical against her diamond wristwatch. She was scrubbing a stubborn grape juice stain that Chloe had made 3 months ago, a stain David had given up on. She scrubbed with a ferocity that seemed almost angry. Scrub. Scrub. Sniff. Scrub. David lowered his umbrella. "What the hell?" The woman froze. She sat back on her heels and turned around. It was her, Victoria Sterling, the CEO, the woman who earned millions while he scanned paper in the basement. But the Ice Queen wasn't looking so icy. Her hair was falling out of its perfect bun, stray strands sticking to her forehead with sweat. There was a smudge of dirt on her cheek. And her eyes were red, swollen. She had been crying. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain hammering against the window and the bubbling of a pot on the stove. "Ms. Sterling," David choked out. Victoria stared at him. She looked at his wet clothes, his exhausted face, and then her gaze drifted to the small girl peeking out from behind his leg. Victoria's lips parted, trembling slightly. David. She knew his name. "What are you doing in my house?" David's shock was quickly replaced by a defensive anger. "How did you get in here? Is this some kind of joke? Is Derek putting you up to this?" Victoria slowly peeled off the rubber gloves. She stood up, smoothing her skirt, trying to regain some of that boardroom composure. But it failed. She looked fragile. "The key was under the mat," she said softly. Her voice lacked its usual command. It was hoarse. It used to always be under the mat." David stepped fully into the room, pulling Chloe to his side. "Who are you? I mean, I know who you are, but why are you here? If you're firing me, you could have just sent an email. You didn't have to break into my home and clean it." Victoria looked down at the floor, at the spot she had been scrubbing. "I didn't come to fire you, David. I came because today is the 14th. David frowned. "So?" "October 14th, she clarified, looking up at him with an intensity that made him flinch. It's been exactly 2 years. The date hit David like a physical blow. He staggered back slightly. October 14th, the day Emily died. He had been so busy, so drowning in work and bills that he had blocked out the date. He knew the anniversary was coming, but he had tried to ignore it to survive the day. "How do you know that?" David whispered. "How do you know about Emily?" Victoria took a step forward, her hand reaching out as if to touch him, then dropping back to her side. "David, you think I'm just your boss. You think I'm a stranger, aren't you?" "No," she said, a tear escaping and tracking through the dirt on her cheek. "I'm the reason she's dead." The silence that followed was deafening. David felt the blood drain from his face. "What did you say?" "I said," Victoria's voice broke, "I am responsible, and I couldn't stay away any longer. I tried, David. I tried to just send the checks, to stay in the shadows. But when I saw you in the elevator today, when I saw how tired you looked—" "Checks?" David interrupted, his mind racing. "What checks? I haven't received a dime from anyone." Victoria's brow furrowed, the sadness in her eyes momentarily replaced by a flash of that CEO sharpness. "What? I've sent a cashier's check for $5,000 every month for the last 24 months, to this address. Addressed to you." "I never got anything," David said, his voice rising. "I'm drowning in debt, lady. I'm eating ramen so my kid can have milk. If you sent money, someone else took it. But that doesn't matter right now. You said you're the reason Emily is dead." He stepped closer, anger radiating off him. "Explain. Now, before I call the police." Chloe whimpered, clutching David's leg. Victoria looked at the child. The pain on her face was agonizing to watch. She dropped to her knees again, not to scrub this time, but to be at eye level with Chloe. "Hello, Chloe," Victoria whispered. "You look just like her. You have her nose." "Don't talk to her," David snapped. Victoria looked up at David, tears streaming freely now. "I didn't kill her, David. Not like that. But I—" She took a deep breath. "Do you remember Emily talking about V? The girl she grew up with in the foster home? The one who was always in trouble?" David's eyes narrowed. He searched his memory. Emily didn't talk much about her childhood. It was too painful. But she did mention a sister. Not by blood, but by bond. A girl she protected. A girl who was wild and reckless. "She mentioned a Victoria," David said slowly. She said she lost track of her, that she went down a bad path." "She didn't lose track of me," Victoria said, her voice trembling. "I pushed her away, because I was jealous. I was jealous that she found you, that she found happiness while I was drowning in this empire my biological father dumped on me." She stood up, reaching into her pocket and pulling out a worn, folded photograph. She handed it to David. It was a Polaroid from the late 90s. 2 teenage girls sitting on the hood of a rusted car. One was clearly Emily, smiling, radiant even in thrift store clothes. The other was a younger, harder-looking Victoria Sterling, smoking a cigarette, looking at Emily with fierce protectiveness. "We made a pact," Victoria said, "that if either of us made it out, we'd pull the other one up. I made it out, David. I found my real father. I got the money, the power, and I left her behind. I was ashamed of where we came from. I ghosted her." David stared at the photo. "That doesn't explain why you're here scrubbing my floor." 2 years ago, Victoria said, Emily called me. It was the first time we'd spoken in a decade. She called me on October 13th. She said she was sick. She said she was scared. She asked for help. Not money. She just wanted her sister. David felt a lump in his throat. He remembered that night. Emily had been crying on the phone in the bedroom. He thought she was talking to a doctor. "And?" David prompted. "And I didn't answer," Victoria sobbed. "I was in a board meeting. I saw the call and I sent it to voicemail. I thought, I'll call her back next week." But there was no next week. She died the next morning. She gestured helplessly around the room. "I have billions of dollars, David. I can buy countries. But I couldn't spare 5 minutes for the only person who ever loved me for me. Not for my name. When she died, I broke. I wanted to come to the funeral, but I couldn't face you. I couldn't face the mess I made. So I sent money. I thought money would fix it." "I told you, I never got the money," David said, his anger confusingly mixed with shock. "I know that now," Victoria said, her voice hardening, "and I have a suspicion who stole it. But that's for later. Today I saw you, and I realized that while I'm sitting in my ivory tower, Emily's husband and daughter are suffering. I came here to confess. But when I walked in and saw the state of this place..." She looked down at her red, scrubbed hands. "I didn't know how to fix the past. I didn't know how to look you in the eye. So I started cleaning. It's the only thing I knew how to do that felt real. I used to clean the floors at the group home while Emily read to me. It was our thing." David looked at the CEO of Sterling Global, the most powerful woman in the city, standing in his run-down living room, smelling of lemon pledge and regret. He looked at the dinner on the stove, a pot roast, Emily's favorite recipe. "You cooked," David said flatly. "I tried," Victoria gave a weak, watery smile. "I burned the carrots." David looked at Chloe. Chloe let go of his leg and took a hesitant step toward Victoria. "Are you my Auntie V?" Chloe asked. Victoria let out a sob that sounded like something tearing in two. She nodded. "Yes. Yes, I am." David ran a hand through his wet hair. This was insane. This was impossible. But looking at the photo and looking at the raw pain in this woman's face, he knew it was true. "You can't just walk in here and scrub away 10 years of guilt, Victoria," David said, his voice hard but lacking the bite it had earlier. "And you definitely can't fix this with a pot roast." "I know," Victoria said, wiping her face. "But I'm not leaving, David. I let her down. I won't let you two down. I don't care if you hate me. I'm going to fix this." "Fix what?" "Everything," she said. "Starting with whoever stole that money, and ending with giving Chloe the life Emily wanted for her." Just then, there was a heavy pounding on the open door frame. They all turned. Standing in the hallway was Derek Halloway. And he wasn't alone. He was flanked by 2 large security guards. "Well, well," Derek sneered, stepping into the apartment, his eyes scanning the domestic scene with malicious glee. "The tracking on the company car led us here. I was worried you'd been kidnapped, Victoria, but it looks like you're just slumming it." Victoria's posture changed instantly. The vulnerable woman vanished. The CEO returned. She straightened her spine, her eyes turning to ice. "Get out of this apartment, Derek," she commanded. "I don't think I will," Derek laughed. He pulled a folded envelope from his jacket pocket. "Because while you were playing housemaid, the board called an emergency meeting regarding your mental stability and your erratic financial transfers." He waved the envelope. "It seems you've been authorizing large payments to a ghost account for 2 years. Embezzlement is a serious charge, Victoria. Even for you." David looked from Derek to Victoria. He realized with a sickening jolt Derek was the one who stole the money, and now he was going to use it to destroy her. The air in the small apartment turned poisonous the moment Derek Halloway stepped fully inside. He didn't look like a vice president. He looked like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "Embezzlement," Victoria repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. She stood straighter, despite the rubber gloves still dangling from her pocket. "You know exactly where that money went, Derek. I authorized those payments personally. They were charitable donations." "Charity?" Derek laughed, a dry, cracking sound. He stepped over a pile of Chloe's coloring books as if they were trash. $5,000 a month to a shell account with no tax ID. And now, here you are, washing the floors of a junior employee. A man who, coincidentally, is the beneficiary of that charity. It doesn't look like a charity, Victoria. It looks like hush money. Or perhaps," he looked David up and down with a sneer, "a very pathetic severance package for a secret lover." David stepped forward, his fists clenched so hard his knuckles turned white. "Watch your mouth." "Or what?" Derek challenged, his eyes flicking to the 2 security guards behind him. "You'll file me to death? You're a nobody, Bennett. You're a rounding error on the payroll." "I am the father of this child," David growled, pointing at the terrified Chloe. "And you are trespassing in my home. I don't care who you are. Get out." Derek smirked, adjusting his silk tie. "Actually, I'm here to save the company. The board has been very concerned about Victoria's erratic behavior since the anniversary of her friend's death, disappearing during meetings, crying in her office, and now misappropriating funds. I followed the GPS on her car because I was worried." He dripped with sarcasm. "But finding her here, in this squalor, it's the final nail in the coffin. Section 14 of the bylaws. A CAO can be removed immediately for conduct detrimental to the firm's reputation or for mental incapacity." He pulled a phone from his pocket. "I've already called the emergency board members. The vote is at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Until then, Victoria, your access to the building, the servers, and the accounts has been suspended. You're locked out." Victoria's face went pale. "You can't do that without a full quorum." "I have the quorum," Derek whispered, leaning in close to her. "I've been building it for months, while you were busy mourning a ghost. Sterling Global is going to be sold to the highest bidder by noon tomorrow. I'll walk away with 100 million. You'll walk away with a scandal." He turned to leave, but stopped at the door, his eyes landing on Chloe again. "And you, Bennett," Derek added, his voice dropping to a faux sympathetic tone. "If I were you, I'd be careful. If this scandal goes public, social services might wonder why a single father living in poverty is accepting illicit funds from his boss. They might decide this environment isn't stable." It was a threat, a direct threat to take Chloe. Something inside David snapped. It wasn't the anger of an employee. It was the primal rage of a father. He didn't think. He didn't calculate. David lunged. He grabbed Derek by the lapels of his expensive suit and slammed him against the doorframe. The impact shook the thin walls of the apartment. "Daddy!" Chloe screamed. The two security guards moved instantly, grabbing David's arms, but David didn't let go. He stared directly into Derek's shocked eyes. "You listen to me," David hissed, his face inches from the VP's. "You can take my job. You can take the company. But if you ever mention my daughter again, if you ever threaten my family, I will find you. And I won't be filing papers." Derek shoved David back, straightening his jacket with trembling hands. For a second, the shark looked scared. He hadn't expected the invisible man to have teeth. "Assault on a corporate officer," Derek stammered, backing into the hallway. "Add that to the list. Let's go." He signaled the guards. They retreated down the hall, Derek's footsteps echoing loudly on the concrete stairs. 8:00 a.m., Victoria!" Derek shouted back up the stairwell. "Don't be late for your execution!" The door slammed shut. The silence that returned to the apartment was heavy, suffocating. David leaned against the wall, breathing hard. His hands were shaking. He looked at Chloe, who was huddled on the sofa, tears in her eyes. He rushed over and scooped her up, burying his face in her curls. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm sorry. It's okay. Daddy's here." Victoria stood in the middle of the room, frozen. The power she had projected just minutes ago was gone. She looked like she was shrinking. "He won," she whispered. "He actually won." She sank onto one of David's mismatched dining chairs, burying her face in her hands. "He blocked the accounts. He has the votes. He's been diverting the money I sent you into his own pocket and framing me for it. And now he's going to sell my father's legacy for parts." She looked up at David, her eyes hollow. "I ruined your life, David. I didn't mean to, but I did. I brought this storm to your door. I should leave. If I leave now, maybe he'll leave you alone." David looked at the woman sitting in his kitchen. He saw the regret. He saw the grief for Emily. But mostly, he saw the injustice. He thought about the last 2 years. The hunger, the cold nights, the constant fear of the eviction notice. All because Derek Halloway had stolen the lifeline Victoria had tried to send. Derek had stolen Chloe's new shoes. He had stolen the heating bill money. He had stolen David's dignity. David set Chloe down gently and handed her a juice box. Then he turned to Victoria. "You're not going anywhere," David said firmly. Victoria looked up, confused. "David, didn't you hear him? I'm locked out. I have no access. No proof. By tomorrow morning, I'm finished." "He said you're locked out of the digital servers," David said, his mind shifting gears. The anger was cooling into something sharper, something architectural. "He said your badge is deactivated." "Yes, which means I can't get into the building to get the physical files from his office. I can't prove the transfers were redirected." "But I can," David said. Victoria blinked. "What?" "I'm the archivist," David said, a grim smile touching his lips. "I'm the guy nobody looks at. Nobody remembers to fire the guy in the basement until the payroll cycle hits on Friday. My badge will still work." "But the files—" "I know where the files are," David interrupted. "Derek thinks he's smart. He thinks deleting an email leaves no trace. But Sterling Global is an old company. The servers have a physical backup protocol in the sub-basement. Every wire transfer over $10,000 generates a hard copy printout for the SEC compliance logs. It's an automated system from the 90s that they never upgraded because it costs too much." David walked over to the closet and grabbed his dry coat. Derek doesn't know about the sub-basement logs because he never goes down there. He's afraid of getting dust on his shoes. But I live down there." Victoria stood up, a spark of hope igniting in her eyes. "You think the proof is there? The routing numbers showing the money went to him, not you. If he didn't physically shred them, they are there," David said, "but we have to get them tonight, before the vote at 8 a.m. He looked at the clock. 9:15 p.m. "But David," Victoria hesitated, looking at the door. "Derek has security at the main entrance. Even if your badge works, they'll see me with you. They have my face on a do not admit list by now." David grabbed his keys. "We aren't going in the front door." The rain had turned into a torrential downpour, turning the city streets into rivers of oil and neon reflections. David's battered sedan, a car held together by duct tape and prayer, idled 2 blocks away from the towering glass monolith of Sterling Global. Inside the car, the tension was palpable. Chloe was safe at Mrs. Rossetti's apartment down the hall, an elderly neighbor who accepted a frozen lasagna as payment for babysitting. "This is insane," Victoria whispered, staring up at the building that bore her name. She had traded her ruined silk blouse for one of David's oversized flannel shirts and a hooded raincoat. She looked less like a CEO and more like a fugitive. "If we get caught, it's criminal trespassing. Burglary." "It's not burglary if you own the building," David reminded her. "I might not own it by tomorrow morning. Then let's make sure that doesn't happen." David killed the engine. "Ready?" They moved through the shadows of the alleyway behind the skyscraper. This was the loading dock area, a place of dumpsters and delivery trucks. "The service entrance is key-carded," Victoria hissed over the sound of the rain. "Derek will have flagged it." "We aren't using the service entrance," David said. He walked past the steel doors to a large, rusted grate in the ground near the recycling compactors. He knelt down and gripped the heavy iron bars. "Help me with this." Victoria hesitated, then grabbed the other side. Together, groaning with effort, they heaved the grate open. A dark, damp hole stared back at them. "The storm drain?" Victoria looked at him in horror. "Are you serious?" "I was an architect before I was a filer," David said, staring into the abyss. "I looked at the original blueprints of this building when I got hired, out of boredom. This isn't just a drain. It's the old ventilation intake for the coal heating system they used in the 1920s. It bypasses the modern security grid and comes out right next to the sub-basement archives." He looked at her. "Trust me." Victoria took a deep breath, the rain plastering her hair to her face. She looked at the hole, then at David. "I trust you." They descended. The tunnel was narrow, smelling of wet concrete and rust. They had to crawl on their hands and knees. David led the way, using his phone as a flashlight. Victoria followed, her expensive manicured nails digging into the grime. "I can't believe this," Victoria muttered, her voice echoing. "I own a private jet, and I'm crawling through a sewer." "It's a ventilation shaft," David corrected, "and you're doing it for Emily. Keep moving." After what felt like an eternity, they reached a small maintenance hatch above them. David pushed it open, and they scrambled up into a dark, humming room. They were in. The sub-basement was vast, filled with the low drone of the building's HVAC systems. Rows of metal shelving stretched into the darkness, filled with decades of dust-covered boxes. "Okay," David whispered, wiping grime from his face. "The automated logger is in Section D, Row 4. Follow me." They moved quickly, dodging the security cameras that swept the main corridors. David knew the blind spots. He navigated the maze of shelves with the confidence of a man who had spent 2 years staring at these labels. They reached Section D. A massive, ancient dot matrix printer sat in the corner, fed by a continuous stack of green bar paper. It was the silent historian of the company's finances. "This is it," David said. He began frantically flipping through the binders stacked next to the machine. October 2024. November 2024. Victoria held the flashlight, her hands shaking. "Hurry, David. The night shift guards do rounds at 10 lash." "Got it." David pulled a heavy binder. He flipped it open to October 14th, 2024. The day the first check was supposed to be sent. He ran his finger down the lines of code and numbers. "Here," he pointed. "Transfer ID 999N4 Alpha, $5,000 authorized by V. Sterling." "Where did it go?" Victoria leaned in, holding her breath. "Destination Bank." David squinted at the faded ink. "Cayman Islands. Account holder. DH Holdings." "Derek Halloway," Victoria gasped. He didn't even try to hide it well. He just assumed no one would ever look down here. "There's more," David said, flipping pages. "November, December, January. Every month. But look at this." He pointed to a much larger entry from 3 days ago. "Transfer request pending. $200 million. Asset liquidation reserve." Victoria's eyes widened. He's not just selling the company tomorrow. He's draining the liquid assets before the sale goes through. He's robbing the company blind. "We need this binder," David said, closing it. "This is the smoking gun. If we walk into that boardroom with this..." Suddenly, the lights in the basement flickered and slammed on. Bright, blinding fluorescent light flooded the aisles. "Well, I have to admit," a voice boomed over the intercom system. "I didn't think you had it in you, Victoria." They froze. At the end of the aisle, standing by the elevator, was the head of security, a massive man named Graves, and behind him, stepping out with a smug grin, was Derek. "You triggered the silent pressure sensor in the ventilation shaft," Derek called out, his voice echoing off the metal shelves. "Did you really think I wouldn't secure the perimeter? I know you, Victoria. You're stubborn." Derek walked slowly down the aisle, flanked by 3 guards. "Give me the binder, David," Derek said, holding out a hand, "and I might let you keep your job. Hell, I'll even give you a raise, $1,000 a year. What do you say?" David clutched the binder to his chest. He looked at Victoria. She was terrified, but she stood her ground. "Don't give it to him," she whispered. "You have nowhere to go," Derek laughed, pulling a taser from his belt. The guards drew their batons. "It's a dead end." David looked around. Derek was right. The elevator was blocked. The ventilation shaft was too slow to climb back down. They were trapped in the corner of the basement. But David's eyes caught something behind Derek. It was the fire suppression system controls. A bright red lever on the wall, labeled "Halon gas, emergency use only, oxygen displacement." It was a dangerous system, meant to put out electrical fires by sucking the oxygen out of the room. But it had a 10-second delay alarm before it activated. David looked at Victoria. He tilted his head slightly toward the emergency exit door 10 feet to their left, a heavy steel door that required a code. "Do you know the override code for the fire doors?" David whispered. "Yes," she breathed. "It's my birthday." "When I say run," David said, barely moving his lips. "You punch that code and you run. What about you?" "I'm going to create a distraction." David looked back at Derek. "You want the binder?" "Come and get it." Derek sighed. "Get him." The guards charged. David didn't run away. He grabbed a heavy metal file box from the shelf and hurled it, not at the guards, but at the fire suppression lever on the wall behind them. Crash! The box hit the lever, slamming it down. "Weep, weep, weep!" A deafening alarm shrieked through the basement. An automated voice boomed. "Warning! Halon discharge in 10 seconds. Evacuate immediately." The guards froze, looking up in panic. Halon gas could knock a man unconscious in seconds if he didn't have a mask. "Run!" David screamed. Victoria sprinted for the door. Her fingers flew across the keypad. Derek realized what was happening. "Stop her!" He lunged for David, tackling him to the ground. The binder skidded across the floor. David took a fist to the jaw, tasting blood. He kicked out, catching Derek in the shin. Derek howled but scrambled for the binder. 9, 8. The voice counted down. Victoria got the door open. She turned back. "David, come on!" David scrambled up. Derek had the binder. He was clutching it like a lifeline. "I have the proof!" Derek yelled over the alarm, struggling to stand up. "You have nothing!" David looked at the heavy rolling shelving unit next to Derek. The locking mechanism on the wheel was rusted. David didn't go for the binder. He kicked the wheel lock of the massive shelf. The shelf, laden with tons of paper, groaned and began to roll on the slightly uneven floor. It gathered speed. "Derek, look out!" Graves shouted. Derek looked up just as the shelving unit slammed into the one next to it, pinning him against the wall. He wasn't crushed, but he was trapped, the binder pinned against his chest, totally immobile. 5, 4, let's go! David grabbed Victoria's arm and pulled her through the heavy steel door. They slammed it shut and spun the wheel lock just as the whoosh of the gas discharge shook the door from the other side. They collapsed in the stairwell, gasping for air. Safe, but empty-handed. Victoria looked at David, her face streaked with tears and dirt. "We left the binder. He has it. He's trapped, but he has the proof. When the gas clears, he'll destroy it." David wiped blood from his lip. He reached into his flannel shirt. "He has the binder," David smiled, wincing in pain, "but he doesn't have the pages." He pulled out a crumpled wad of green bar computer paper. While Derek was gloating, before the tackle, David had ripped the critical month of October 2024 out of the rings. Victoria stared at the paper. Then she threw her arms around David's neck and hugged him tighter than she had ever hugged anyone. "You crazy, brilliant architect," she sobbed. "We're not done yet," David groaned, helping her stand. "We have until 8 or 8 a.m. to get dry, get presentable, and crash a board meeting." The digital clock on the dashboard of David's car read 4:47 a.m. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the city glistening under the pre-dawn streetlights. They were parked outside David's apartment building again. It was a risk, but they had no money, no credit cards, and nowhere else to go. "He'll be out by now," Victoria said, staring at her shaking hands. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. The security team would have overridden the Halon system within 10 minutes. Derek is free, and he's going to be hunting us. "Let him hunt," David said, his voice surprisingly steady. "We have the bait." He tapped the pocket where the crumpled ledger pages sat against his heart. They hurried inside, collecting a sleeping Chloe from Mrs. Rossetti. The old woman asked no questions, simply handing over the child and a Tupperware container of cold pasta. Back in the apartment, the reality of their situation set in. Victoria Sterling, the woman who appeared on the cover of Forbes, looked like a disaster. Her face was smeared with grease, her hair was a tangled bird's nest, and she was wearing David's muddy flannel shirt. "I can't walk into a board meeting like this," she whispered, looking in the cracked bathroom mirror. "Appearance is currency, David. If I look like a homeless person, they'll vote me out before I even open my mouth. They'll say Derek was right about my mental state." David walked to the small closet in the hallway. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the doorknob. He hadn't opened the back section of this closet in 2 years. He pulled the door open. Inside, Preserved in plastic garment bags were Emily's clothes. She bought this for her first interview at the library, David said softly, pulling out a navy blue skirt suit. It wasn't designer. It was polyester, bought from a discount rack, but Emily had treated it like armor. She called it her brave suit. Victoria touched the fabric. Her fingers trembled. I remember. I sent her the money to buy it. It was the last check she actually cashed before I stopped calling. Wear it, David said. David, I can't. It's hers. That's exactly why you have to. He turned to her, his eyes intense. You aren't going in there as Victoria Sterling, the billionaire heiress. You're going in there as Emily's sister. You're going in there to fight for the people Derek steps on. Wear the suit. 30 minutes later, the transformation was chilling. Victoria stepped out of the bathroom. The suit was a little tight in the shoulders and loose in the waist, but she made it look like couture. She had pulled her hair back into a severe, wet ponytail and scrubbed her face clean. Without makeup, she looked younger, sharper, and dangerously focused. She didn't look like an ice queen anymore. She looked like a fighter. David had changed into his only suit, the charcoal one he had worn to Emily's funeral. He brushed the dust off the shoulders and tightened his tie. How do I look? Victoria asked, smoothing the lapel of her dead sister's jacket. Like trouble. David smiled grimly. Now, we just have one problem. Getting past the lobby. Derek will have the building on lockdown. Your badge is dead. Mine probably is too by now. Victoria walked over to the kitchen table and picked up the Tupperware of cold pasta Mrs. Rossetti had given them. She stared at it for a second. Then a slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. I know how to get in, she said. Derek thinks in terms of security guards and key cards. He forgets that a building that size is a living organism. It needs to be fed. What do you mean? The catering deliveries. Victoria checked the wall clock. 5:30 a.m. The breakfast pastries and coffee for the executive floor arrive at the loading dock. I know the vendor. I signed the contract myself. You want to sneak in on a donut truck? Not sneak, Victoria corrected, grabbing her phone which had finally charged to 5%. I'm the CEO. I don't sneak. I inspect. The boardroom of Sterling Global was a fortress of mahogany and silence. It was 7:55 a.m. 12 board members sat around the massive oval table. They were the titans of industry, men and women who moved markets with a whisper. At the head of the table sat Arthur Pendleton, the chairman of the board. He was 80 years old, with eyes like a hawk, and a patience that was wearing thin. To his right sat Derek Halloway. Derek looked awful. His nose was bandaged, he walked with a slight limp, and his impeccable suit was wrinkled. He was spinning a story that had the board members murmuring in shock. A psychotic break, Derek was saying, gesturing with a trembling hand. I went to her location out of concern. She had allied herself with a low-level employee, a man with a history of financial instability. When I confronted them, they lured me into the sub-basement and triggered the fire suppression system. They tried to asphyxiate me with halon gas, ladies and gentlemen. It was an assassination attempt. A gasp went around the room. This is grave, Arthur Pendleton rumbled. Victoria has always been passionate, but violence. She's unstable, Arthur, Derek pressed, checking his watch. She's dangerous to herself and the company. That's why we must vote immediately. The buyers from Zurich are waiting. We sell the company by noon, we secure the assets, and we get her the help she needs in a secure facility. Very well, Arthur sighed. If she is not here to defend herself. I have instructed security to bar her entry, Derek added quickly, for everyone's safety. Then let us proceed, Arthur said. The motion is to remove Victoria Sterling as CEO and authorize the immediate sale of Sterling Global assets. All in favor?" Derek raised his hand, a triumphant smirk touching his bruised lips. 5 other hands went up slowly. "Opposed?" Arthur asked. The heavy double doors at the end of the room didn't just open, they were kicked open. 2 security guards stumbled backward into the room, tripping over themselves. Stepping over them was not a SWAT team, but a man pushing a stainless steel catering cart loaded with coffee urns. It was David, and walking beside him, carrying a tray of danishes like it was a royal scepter, was Victoria. "I oppose!" Victoria's voice rang out, clear and cold as a bell. "Security!" Derek screamed, jumping to his feet. "Get them out! She has a weapon!" "Sit down, Derek," Victoria commanded. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The authority in her voice was absolute. She walked to the head of the table, placing the tray of pastries down in front of Arthur Pendleton. "Fresh raspberry Danish, Arthur," she said calmly. "I know it's your favorite." Arthur stared at her. He looked at the cheap, ill-fitting navy suit she was wearing. He looked at David, the archivist, standing protectively behind her. "Victoria," Arthur said slowly, "Derek says you tried to kill him." "Derek says a lot of things," Victoria said, turning to face her accuser. "He says I'm crazy. He says I'm embezzling. He says I'm unfit." She walked around the table slowly. But Derek forgot one thing. He forgot that this company wasn't built on stocks and bonds. It was built on details. My father taught me to always check the details. "This is a farce," Derek shouted, his face flushing red. "She's stalling. Call the police." "We don't need the police yet," David spoke up. His deep voice filled the room. He reached into his jacket pocket. "We just need a little reading material." David tossed the crumpled, torn pages of the green bar ledger onto the center of the mahogany table. Arthur Pendleton reached out and picked up the papers. He adjusted his spectacles. "What is this?" Arthur asked. "That," David pointed, "is the physical log of every wire transfer Derek Halloway has authorized in the last 24 months. While he was telling you I was stealing, he was funneling $5,000 a month into a shell account. And 3 days ago, he moved $200 million of the company's liquidity into an offshore holding company in the Caymans, a company registered to his wife's maiden name." The room went dead silent. Derek's face drained of color. That's a forgery. They printed that at home." "It's dot matrix, Derek," Victoria said icily, "from the sub-basement logger, the one you didn't know existed because you think you're too good to visit the archives. The paper has a serialized watermark. Check it, Arthur." Arthur held the paper up to the light. He saw the watermark. He looked at the transaction codes. He looked at the date stamp. OCT 14, 2024. Arthur slowly lowered the paper. He turned his hawk-like gaze to Derek. 200 million? Arthur whispered. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Arthur, listen," Derek stammered, sweat breaking out on his forehead. It was a strategic reserve. To protect the assets during the sale, I was going to move it back." "Into an account controlled by you?" Arthur asked. "That's not strategy, son. That's grand larceny." Derek looked at the door. He looked at the security guards who were still standing there, confused. "Arrest her!" Derek shrieked, pointing at Victoria. "She's the one. She hacked the system." "Enough," Victoria said. She slammed her hand down on the table. The sound made everyone jump. "You wanted to sell my father's company, Derek. You wanted to strip it for parts. You wanted to take the livelihood of 4,000 employees, people like David, who work 14 hours a day just to feed their children, and turn it into a golden parachute for yourself." She looked around the table at the board members. I admit, Victoria said, her voice softening slightly. I have been absent. I have been grieving. I lost my sister, and I lost my way. I let this wolf into the hen house. That is my failure. She gestured to her suit. This suit belonged to my sister. She died with nothing because I was too busy making money to answer her call. I won't make that mistake again. I am not selling Sterling Global, and I am certainly not letting this thief walk away with it. Arthur Pendleton stood up. He looked at Derek. You're fired, Derek, Arthur said simply, and you will remain in this room until the authorities arrive. Security, hold him. The guards, realizing which way the wind was blowing, stepped forward and grabbed Derek by the arms. No, you can't do this. I have the votes, Derek screamed as he was dragged back into his chair. Arthur turned to Victoria. He looked her up and down, taking in the cheap suit and the fierce determination in her eyes. Motion to reinstate Victoria Sterling as CEO, with full executive powers, Arthur said. All in favor? Every hand in the room went up. Victoria let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for 2 years. She looked at David. David offered her a small, tired smile. He gave a tiny nod. Arthur cleared his throat. However, Victoria, we do need to discuss the matter of the $5,000 a month you did intend to send. Company funds cannot be used for personal reasons. Victoria straightened up. It wasn't personal, Arthur. It was a retainer. A retainer? Arthur raised an eyebrow. For whom? Victoria looked at David. For my new chief operations officer, Victoria said. David Bennett. He knows where the bodies are buried, Arthur. And unlike Derek, he knows how to clean up a mess. David's jaw dropped. What? Victoria winked at him. I told you I'd fix it. 6 months later, the damp smell of the Garden View apartments was just a memory. The sunlight streamed into the open kitchen of a modest but beautiful suburban house. A house David had designed himself years ago, a blueprint he thought he'd never get to build. Victoria stood at the island, chopping vegetables. She wasn't wearing a power suit or a panic-stricken expression. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt that said, World's okayest aunt. You know, David said, leaning against the doorframe, watching Chloe chase a new puppy around the backyard. You don't have to be here every Sunday. You have an empire to run. Victoria smiled, tossing a piece of carrot to the floor for the puppy to find later. The empire runs better now that I have a COO who actually understands how the business works. Besides, I promised Emily. She wiped her hands on a towel and looked out the window at Chloe. The little girl was laughing, a sound that had been missing from David's life for too long. I spent 10 years trying to build a legacy of money, Victoria said softly. I thought that was what made me strong. But when I was scrubbing your floor that night, I realized I was the poorest person in the room. David walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. They weren't a couple. Not yet, anyway. They were something more complex. They were a family forged in fire, bound together by the memory of the woman they both loved. You saved us, Victoria, David said. No. She shook her head, her eyes bright. You opened the door. I just walked in. Outside, Chloe tripped and skinned her knee. She didn't cry for her dad. She looked up and yelled, Auntie V, I need a magic kiss. Victoria dropped the knife and ran out the back door before David could even move. He watched them through the glass, the billionaire CEO kneeling in the grass, kissing a scraped knee, looking happier than she ever had in a boardroom. David smiled. The house was clean, but this time it was full of love. And that is the story of how a single dad and a CEO found redemption in a bottle of grape juice and a dusty archive. It's a reminder that sometimes The people who seem the strongest are the ones who are breaking inside, and the people who seem invisible are the ones holding everything together. Victoria learned that her legacy wasn't in her bank account, but in the promise she kept to an old friend. What do you think? If you were David, would you have forgiven Victoria for waiting 2 years to show up? Or was her redemption genuine? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice, heartbreak, and second chances, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.